Hi, I'm Andy Parkin, Managing Director of the multi-award winning Speed Screed. So how do you choose the right screeding system? We're going to look at a number of areas that you may consider when you're looking at a system. That first of all, how quickly do you want to get your floor coverings bonded to the surface or laid on the surface? So that could be tiles, vinyls, laminates, engineered wood, anything that needs to go on the surface. The screed needs to be dry. So not just visually dry, but enough moisture out of the screed to allow a bond or allow just for the wood to float on top without affecting the wood itself, not absorbing the moisture out of the screed. If you try and bond too early, it'll probably just delaminate and then you'll have further problems. So it's very important to test screeds before floor coverings go on. But it's important to decide before the screed goes in just how quickly you need those floor coverings on in your program. We can provide screeds that you can tile after a matter of hours. Now that might not be your particular requirements, but it's just to let you know that we've got anything from a matter of hours to standardized times. So depending on the thickness of the screed, which will affect the drying times, you could be looking at 3 months for a typical screed to dry for it to be ready to accept the floor coverings. So that would be one thing to consider. You can put a liquid DPM on top of the screed, but it would be far more cost effective to start out with a fast drying screed to start with. So you know when it's going to dry and when you should be able to put your floor coverings on. Another thing to consider would be when can you actually walk on it. So I think there's two things. There's light foot traffic and then there's this full site traffic. So the screed would always need to be protected until it is actually covered. Generally, the screeds, the leveling screeds, are not wearing surfaces. So over a period of time, if they're not protected, then they can get damaged, and you can see wear on the surface. So generally, it would be protected. But when can you actually walk? Again, we can provide products where you can walk on the screed in a matter of hours. A traditional screed may take longer. So depending on the weather, in terms of the temperatures, it could be around 5 days to actually have light foot traffic on there. To get full site traffic, it could be longer. So we could be talking 24 hours for certain products we're able to supply. Alternatively, again, that could be anything from 3 to 7 days for other products. So I think it's just important just to decide when do you need to be trafficking there, when do you need other tradespeople on the surface of that screed working. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing might be loading of the screed. So this might be fixing into the screed, this might be that you've got to pass some plant or machinery across the screed, and it needs to have a certain amount of strength to resist that load that's placed upon it. So I think that's something to consider there as well. So if there is a requirement, working with perhaps a structural engineer who will then be able to tell us what the load is required, we would be able to accurately provide a screed that will have the strength required to resist that particular load. So it could be early loading that's an issue there. Will the screed have underfloor heating in? So that's something that may determine the screed. It may be that you look for a dense screed that's going to give good thermal conductivity. It may be that you've only got a certain depth of screed that you can go to. So that may change the type of screed that you're going to put in. Certainly on the underfloor heating. or in other applications as well. So depending whether it's going to be bonded onto a concrete substrate, whether there's a membrane, whether you have insulation there, will all determine the depths of screeds required. Certain screeds will perform at thinner depths. So again, if you can come up with a profile of the screed, it's then easy to find the characteristics of that screed so they can match what you actually require. So the other things to consider from the system as a whole would be, do you require insulation? What type of insulation? What strength of insulation are you going to need? So what compressive strength? What is the thermal resistance of that insulation? Is it there for thermal performance, or is it there for void fill? Lots of things around insulation. It's very important to get the right system. If we're trying to achieve a certain U value, we can calculate things like that for you to ensure that you get the correct system. Acoustics is another thing that needs to be considered. So there's a requirement for multi-occupancy buildings that they've got to meet a certain decibel. So it's part L of the building regulations. So that might be a consideration for multi-occupancy buildings. It also might be that you're in a school, you want to apply acoustics. It might be at home. Again, you might want to apply acoustic insulation. These are factors that can be considered within the package. The other things that you would look at would be membranes. So is there a requirement for a damp-proof membrane? So it may be that it's fresh concrete that the screed is going to be going onto. So the concrete will have a high moisture content, potentially up to 12 months, depending on the thickness. So that might, what you don't want is the availability of that moisture going into the screed and delaying the drying times of the screed. So membranes might be to suppress that moisture. Also, we can have slip membranes. So it's best practice to place a slip membrane over insulation, especially foil-backed insulation. So that is best practice. So there are other things that you may consider. I think overall, the best thing to do is to fact find, come up with a list of necessities. You may have a list of things that you'd like, and then that may come down to a possibility of cost, but you may have a list of things that you definitely need for the project. And we can design that system to tailor for your exact needs. Hope this has helped. Please feel free to ask any questions.